The year was 1961. Across America, drag strips echoed with the sound of screaming V8s. Detroit was locked in a horsepower war. Every automaker wanted the same thing: bigger engines, faster cars, and headlines that would make competitors look obsolete. Then Chevrolet unleashed something nobody expected: a massive new V8 called the 409. 409 cubic inches of cast iron fury. To enthusiasts, it became a legend. To racers, it was a weapon. To Chevrolet, it was proof that they could go toe-to-toe with Ford and Chrysler on the nation's drag strips. But what almost nobody knows is that behind the glory was a dark reputation. A reputation earned through shattered pistons, exploding flywheels, broken drivetrains, and crashes so violent that some racers began calling it something else: the WidowMaker. Most people know the 409 because of the famous Beach Boys song. But the real story is far more dangerous, and what happened next changed everything. To understand the 409, you have to go back to the late 1950s. Chevrolet's engineers were facing a problem. Ford was getting faster, Chrysler was getting faster, NASCAR and drag racing had become battlegrounds where winning on Sunday translated directly into sales on Monday. The automotive landscape was shifting beneath everyone's feet. Performance was no longer just about luxury or comfort. It was about raw speed, about dominance, about proving which company built the toughest engines in America. Teenagers saved their paychecks dreaming of these machines. Fathers traded in perfectly good sedans just to feel that surge of acceleration. Racing wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was becoming a national obsession, and Chevrolet knew they were falling behind. Chevrolet's existing 348 cubic inch W Series engine was respectable. It featured a unique combustion chamber design built into the block rather than the cylinder head. The heads were nearly flat underneath, creating a distinctive wedge-shaped chamber. The design produced excellent low-end torque. It was reliable for everyday driving, smooth, predictable, the kind of engine that made salesmen happy because customers rarely complained. But racers wanted more, much more. They needed something that could embarrass a Ford Interceptor, something that could leave Chrysler engineers scratching their heads, something that would make spectators jump to their feet when the lights went green. So Chevrolet engineers enlarged the bore to 4.31 inches and paired it with a 3.50-inch stroke. The result was 409 cubic inches. Right away, the numbers were impressive. The first high-performance versions produced 360 horsepower. Then came a dual-quad setup pushing 409 horsepower. A neat coincidence. 409 cubic inches. 409 horsepower. The marketing department loved it. It was the kind of number that looked perfect in advertisements. The kind of specification that rolled off the tongue in dealership showrooms. Young buyers didn't need to understand compression ratios or camshaft duration. They just needed to hear that number. It sounded powerful. It sounded dangerous. It sounded like everything they wanted. But racers wanted even more. Chevrolet answered with increasingly aggressive versions. Compression ratios climbed to 11.25, 1. Then higher. Special camshafts arrived. Dual Carter 4-barrel carburetors appeared. By 1962, certain versions were officially rated at 409 horsepower and 420 lb-ms of torque. Unofficially, many insiders believed the true output was much higher. Dynamometer operators whispered about numbers that Chevrolet wouldn't publish. Engineers knew what the engine could really do when properly tuned. But insurance companies were already getting nervous about performance cars. Advertised horsepower had to stay somewhat reasonable, at least on paper, and that was just the beginning. But there was a problem. The 409 was making power faster than the rest of the car could handle. At drag strips across America, transmissions failed, drive shafts twisted, rear axles shattered, clutches exploded. One racer reportedly joked that owning a 409 meant buying replacement drivetrain parts in bulk. Another claimed his local parts supplier knew him by first name, that the counterman would just shake his head and ask which component broke this time. The clutch? The U-joint? The differential? It became a running joke in the racing community. How do you identify a 409 owner? He's the guy in the parts store every Monday morning. The engine delivered massive torque almost instantly. That torque hit like a sledgehammer. A hard launch could send shockwaves through every mechanical component behind the crankshaft. And sometimes those components didn't survive. The problem wasn't just breakage, it was the unpredictability. One weekend, everything would work perfectly. The next weekend, something would snap without warning. Experienced racers learned to listen for unusual sounds. A slight ping, a faint grinding, any hint that something was about to let go. Because when parts failed at high speed, there was rarely time to react. You can probably guess what happened next, but the truth is even crazier. Chevrolet engineers continued refining the platform. In 1963, they unveiled the most feared version yet, the legendary 425 horsepower 409. It used dual 4-barrel carburetors, solid lifters, a radical camshaft, and an 11:1 compression ratio. Officially, it produced 425 horsepower at 6,000 revolutions per minute. Torque measured roughly 425 at the time. Those numbers were staggering. This wasn't just an incremental improvement. This was Chevrolet declaring war. Every component was designed for maximum aggression. The valve springs were stiffer. The push rods were stronger. Even the oil pump was upgraded to handle sustained high RPM operation. This engine wasn't meant for cruising to the grocery store. It was meant to destroy everything in front of it. Quarter-mile times dropped into the low 13-second range. Some professionally prepared cars dipped into the 12s. In an era when many family sedans struggled to reach 60 miles per hour in 15 seconds, the 409 felt like a rocket. Magazine testers were stunned. One described the acceleration as violent. Another said the engine seemed determined to tear itself out of the chassis. A third wrote that riding in a full-power 409 felt less like driving and more like barely controlled chaos. That your hands gripped the steering wheel not from excitement, but from genuine concern about what might happen next. And in some cases, that wasn't far from the truth. The engine's incredible torque exposed weaknesses everywhere. Flywheel failures became particularly terrifying. Back then, safety regulations were minimal. Many racers used stock-style flywheels, spinning at over 6,500 revolutions per minute. When one failed, it didn't simply crack, it exploded. Metal fragments could punch through floors, transmission tunnels, and firewalls. Drivers suffered serious injuries. Mechanics learned to fear the sound. One veteran racer later recalled that a flywheel explosion sounded like a grenade detonating beneath the driver's seat. He described walking up to a car after a failure and finding jagged metal pieces embedded in the seat frame, finding holes torn through sheet metal that should have been solid, finding transmission fluid and gear oil sprayed across surfaces that should have stayed clean, and worst of all, finding blood. Because when a flywheel came apart at those speeds, it didn't care what was in the way. And then the real nightmare started. As power levels increased, racers pushed the engines beyond factory limits. Many modified 409s produced well over 500 horsepower. Some exceeded 600. Nitromethane drag applications pushed even higher. The problem was that the original block design had limitations. The W-Series architecture wasn't originally intended for extreme racing abuse. At sustained high RPM, oil control could become problematic. Valve train stress increased dramatically. Connecting rods faced immense loads, bearings suffered. Engine builders began reporting spun bearings and damaged crankshafts after repeated high-speed runs. One mechanic reportedly described opening an abused 409 and finding enough metal shavings in the oil pan to build another engine. The worn bearing material had mixed with oil and circulated through the system like grinding paste. Every journal surface showed damage. Every clearance had increased beyond specification. The engine hadn't just failed, it had essentially destroyed itself from the inside out. Yet racers kept pushing. Why? Because when the engine survived, it was devastatingly fast. At tracks across America, 409 powered Chevrolets were becoming legends. Drivers like Dave Strickler helped establish the engine's reputation. Old Reliable, they called his 1963 Impala. Though the nickname was somewhat ironic, given how often components needed replacement. But when everything worked, When every part held together for just one more pass, the car was nearly unbeatable. In NHRA competition, the 409 became one of Chevrolet's most effective drag racing weapons. Cars equipped with the engine routinely dominated superstock categories. Crowds loved them. The sound was unforgettable, a deep mechanical roar that transformed into a furious scream near redline. The engine didn't just make power, it made drama, and that drama sold cars. By 1963, Chevrolet dealers couldn't keep certain performance models in stock. Young buyers wanted the engine everyone was talking about. They walked into showrooms with magazine articles folded in their pockets, with photographs torn from racing publications, with quarter-mile time slips their friends had shown them. They didn't want explanations or alternatives. They wanted a 409. The Beach Boys immortalized it in their hit song 409. Suddenly, the engine wasn't just a racing motor, it was a cultural phenomenon. The song played on radios across the country. Teenagers who had never seen a drag strip sang along. Girls who couldn't tell a carburetor from a camshaft knew that song. The 409 transcended automotive enthusiasm and became part of American pop culture. Chevrolet couldn't have bought better advertising, but behind the scenes, Chevrolet engineers knew something. The 409 had reached its limit. Most people don't realize that the engine was never intended to remain Chevrolet's ultimate racing platform. A replacement was already being developed, and it would eventually eclipse everything the 409 had achieved. That replacement was the Mark IV big block program, the future 396 and 427 engines. These new designs addressed many of the W Series weaknesses. The combustion chambers were more efficient. The breathing characteristics were superior. The architecture offered greater long-term development potential. In simple terms, Chevrolet had built something even better. Engineers had learned from every 409 failure. Every broken part had taught them something. Every race weekend had revealed another weakness to eliminate. The Mark IV program benefited from all that painful experience. But before the 409 faded away, it had one final chapter to write. In NASCAR competition, the engine battled some of the toughest rivals in America: Ford's 427 FE, Chrysler's Max Wedge, later, the legendary Hemi. Every race became an engineering war. Horsepower mattered. Reliability mattered even more. Teams regularly tore engines apart after races searching for hidden weaknesses. Cracked pistons, burned valves, worn bearings, broken rocker arms. Nothing escaped scrutiny. Mechanics inspected every component under bright lights. They measured tolerances with precision instruments. They looked for hairline cracks invisible to the naked eye. They searched for discoloration indicating excessive heat. They checked for wear patterns that might predict future failures, because a single failure could mean losing hundreds of miles from victory, and victory was worth millions in publicity. What they discovered next changed everything. Engine development during the 409 era transformed how Detroit approached performance engineering. Manufacturers realized that raw horsepower wasn't enough. An engine had to survive. Oil systems improved, metallurgy improved, flywheel safety standards improved, driveline components became stronger. The entire industry was learning. Every manufacturer faced similar problems. Every racing team discovered similar weaknesses. Information spread through the racing community. Mechanics talked to each other. Engineers compared notes. Even competitors shared knowledge when safety was involved. Many lessons were learned through failure. Painful failure. The kind that breaks parts, destroys race cars, and occasionally injures people. That is where the WidowMaker reputation truly came from. Not because the 409 itself was uniquely evil, not because Chevrolet built a defective engine, but because the engine arrived during a wild period when power was increasing faster than safety technology. Drivers were suddenly controlling machines capable of incredible acceleration. Yet many of the supporting components belonged to an earlier era. The result was predictable. Parts failed, sometimes catastrophically. And when they did, people remembered. Stories spread, exaggerations grew. Every failure became more dramatic in the retelling. The WidowMaker nickname probably started as dark humor among racers, a way to cope with the danger, a way to acknowledge that they were pushing boundaries nobody had tested before. But the name stuck, and once it did, the 409's reputation was sealed. By 1965, Chevrolet's newer Mark IV big block engines were taking center stage. The 409 quietly began disappearing from the spotlight. Production numbers declined. Factory support shifted elsewhere. The muscle car world moved on. There were new engines to talk about, new horsepower wars to fight, new records to break. The 409 had served its purpose. It had established Chevrolet as a serious performance manufacturer. It had won races. It had sold cars. It had captured imaginations. But technology doesn't stand still, and neither does Detroit. But legends don't die that easily. Today, original high-performance 409 powered cars are among the most sought-after Chevrolets ever built. Collectors pay enormous sums for authentic examples. Rare dual-quad cars command six-figure prices. Engine builders still recreate the famous combinations. At car shows, crowds gather whenever a genuine 409 fires to life. Not because it's the most powerful engine ever built, not because it's the rarest, but because it represents something special. A moment when engineers were discovering the limits of American performance in real time. A moment when every weekend felt like an experiment, and every race felt like a battle. The 409 changed Chevrolet forever. It proved that the company could build an engine capable of competing with the best in the world. It helped ignite the muscle car era. It inspired songs, racers, engineers, and generations of enthusiasts. Yet it also revealed the dangers of chasing horsepower without fully understanding the consequences. That's the explosive truth behind Chevrolet's so-called WidowMaker, a 4.31-inch bore, a 3.50-inch stroke, up to 425 factory horsepower, mountains of torque, and enough raw force to expose every weakness hiding behind it. The 409 didn't earn its reputation because it was perfect. It earned it because it was powerful enough to change the rules. And sometimes, changing the rules comes with a price paid in broken parts and shattered expectations, a price paid in lessons learned the hard way, a price paid by every racer who pushed too hard and discovered what happens when metal reaches its absolute limit. But those who survived remember it differently. They remember the sound, the feeling, the pure, unfiltered experience of controlling something barely controllable. They remember winning races nobody thought they could win. They remember the respect in competitors' eyes when they pulled up to the starting line. They remember when the 409 was everything. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments which legendary engine you'd like to see next. There are plenty of forgotten racing monsters, engineering disasters, and horsepower wars still waiting to be uncovered. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the machines that shaped automotive history.